wisdom is kind of a theme that we've seen carrying on. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, which giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not. But that wisdom that we ask for, and the wisdom that we should be looking for, is wisdom that's characteristic of verse 17. So you're like, well, how do I know if this is God's wisdom? Well, let's look at it.
Welcome to today's episode of Walking in Faith, a podcast to help you grow in your daily walk with God. Join Treg and David in this study of James as they take a closer look at the dangers of being double-minded. If you enjoyed today's study, please subscribe and share it with someone else.
Good morning, David.
Good morning.
And good morning to all of you who are watching this morning. Thank you for joining us in another episode of Walking in Faith. And I don't know if we've talked about this before, about changing the name eventually, David.
Yeah,
I don't know. We'll look at that. If you have any great ideas on what we should call it, we're all in. We'd love to hear from you as we dive into God's Word together. So today we are back in James chapter 3, and we've kind of stepped away from it as we recapped a few weeks ago, and we just talked about some practical things in life and practical things in ministry. But today we're coming back towards the end of James chapter 3 when we're talking about wisdom. And James is talking about this wisdom that's from above. And he says, who's a wise man and a dude with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not and lie not against the truth. The wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion in every evil work. But the wisdom that is from above is pure, peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. So there is just a ton in here, David, and there's a ton packed in here. And we'll definitely have a couple podcast videos on this, if not 3, as we look at this important subject of wisdom. And we know wisdom is kind of a theme that we've seen carrying on. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, which giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not. But that wisdom that we ask for, and the wisdom that we should be looking for, is wisdom that's characteristic of verse 17. So you're like, well, how do I know if this is God's wisdom? Well, let's look at it. Is it pure? Is it peaceable? Is it gentle? Is it easy to be entreated? Is it without, partiality, again, without playing favorites like we talked about in chapter 2? And is it without hypocrisy? And is this wisdom causing peace, or is it causing strife? And as we dive into James here, and as we dive into James chapter 3, in verse 14 is really, I think, David, it's a key verse. Mm-hmm. I think it's a verse that's hard for us, for many people, to try to balance. And when we read it here, it says bitter envying and strife. But if you were to look up, if we wanted to dive deeper to see what these words mean, okay, so I can just pull it up on my Blue Letter Bible app here, and I'll go down to bitter envying and strife. And so if I look up the word strife, okay, it's this idea of putting oneself forward. I love how it's defined here. A desire to put oneself forward. Okay, so when I say then strife, a desire to put oneself forward. We talked about in our last video about me, taking care of me. So some people have translated this, and I think it's good in how they translate it. But if you had been bitter envying and selfish ambition, okay? So bitter envying and selfish ambition in your hearts, glory not and lie not against the truth. So, that being said, how do we balance being driven? How do we balance being successful? How do we balance, hey, I want to be successful in business. I want to I want to grow the ministry. I want to do this. I want to publish a book. I want to have successful children. I want to do this in a triathlon or this in a marathon. Where's the balance, okay, of selfish ambition and just drive? And how do we balance that? So climbing a corporate ladder. Is climbing a corporate ladder selfish ambition? Or is that worldly wisdom? Is it what I want? How do we make that distinction? I mean, what do you think when you think about selfish ambition?
Yeah, I think we really just have to always make sure our motives are right.
Okay.
Because if we're trying to climb the ladder to make a name for ourselves or to make more money, whatever it may be, well, obviously that's not with the right motive. That's
right.
Seeking what we want and not just doing the most with what God has given us, or trying to further His kingdom in whatever area we may work in. So I think when we're really thinking about how we can gain wisdom and gain status for ourselves, that's where we really start to go wrong.
Okay, so let's say, all right, let's talk about a pastor then, or let's talk about you in youth group. So let's say that you just have this desire to grow the youth group. Let's say, man, you just wanted to see cross the 50 threshold or cross the 60 threshold. Is that selfish ambition? Or could we say, hey, that's just doing more for God?
I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily wrong to have that desire to grow, but I think for me personally, I have to be very careful as to why I want it to grow.
Good.
Do I want to grow it to be able to get on Facebook and show all my friends like, look, we just crossed this milestone for us, or is it because, hey, that represents 50 souls that we're reaching that we wouldn't have otherwise?
Yeah.
So we're, my philosophy in youth group is do it the best that we can. And I believe growth will happen naturally because of that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, growth is not the number one priority for us, specifically in that area, because I know how I am, and I like to look at numbers, and so I know that I would struggle with that if that was the focus.
Yeah. No, that's really good. And I think, looking at our ministry, so let's just talk about faith for a second, because that's where we are here. We're walking in faith. I would say at Faith, people could look and say, well, the Treg's doing all of this. But in essence, I don't feel like I'm doing anything. You know what I mean? So how has Faith Baptist Church grown over the years? Well, there is my desire, I hope this is right. I don't have necessarily a selfish ambition to be the largest church in Morgantown. I really don't care. And I have no idea what the largest church is, nor do I care what the largest church is. But I'm striving not for selfish ambition necessarily in that realm, but striving for excellence. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of what you said. Just doing the best that we can do, that God has called us to do, with the abilities that God has given us, with the 5 or the 50.
Yeah.
Is that, in youth group?
Yeah.
And so, and as naturally as faith continues to grow and resources come in, there's more opportunity, Mm-hmm. So when we first started doing videos, it was an iPhone 7, and a lamp. And if you look at some of those old 2 Minute of Truth videos that I used to do, it'd be a lamp over here in a corner, and and the phone the best way I could. I had no idea what I was doing, but just trying to do it. But as ministry has grown and opportunities have grown, we know that's for us, that's not the best. Mm-hmm. The best is a nice camera and, a Yeti. It's still not the best camera in the world, but I think it's the best we got and what we want to do. So that's, to me, it's striving for what's best, not for selfish ambition. Mm-hmm. Because selfish ambition would already build a new building. We just started a project, but buildings and bucks, and that's not where it's at.
Yeah. I think sometimes when it comes to pastors, when they focus more on all they care about is the group as a whole, mm-hmm. and that's their main focus, and they don't really minister to individuals.
Yeah.
I think that's where we have to be careful of that self that ambition, because if we're not willing to minister to the individual and we only care about being up in front of everybody, making sure that we're building new buildings, that we're talking about numbers, that's when I think we need to check our motives and make sure that we're not pursuing wisdom that is for our own gain.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's just vanity. It's just vain. It's boring talk. I don't like it. So to me, true growth is not numbers necessarily in a church setting. It's two people that are being discipled, on a regular basis, and helping them grow. And I love that. So let's take it though for somebody that's not in ministry, and let's talk about somebody that's in the corporate world. I think we could say the same thing. I think as Christians, Paul tells the church at Philippi, I want your love to abound yet more and more in knowledge and all judgment. Then he says, I want you to approve things that are excellent, and I want you to be sincere and without offense. And I think that in any business, if you just follow that, my love abounds more and more with knowledge and judgment, and how I do that, that's my love's boundaries. And then I approve things that are excellent. I test things that are excellent. And so that's putting me even at another level in corporation. Okay, and I'm sincere, transparent. I'm not a hypocrite. I'm not, sneaking deals behind people's backs. I'm honest. And so I'm sincere, and I'm without offense, so I'm taking my standard on this or doing that. God prospers that.
Yeah.
And I think, again, so even without selfish ambition, just doing what God's called you to do, that's going to grow. So let's say that's a mom watching right now. Okay, moms, I think the same thing. We can be, as a mother, I say you can be as a mom have a lot of selfish ambition when it comes to children and what you want out of your kids and what you want your kids to be and the grades you want your kids to be and the career you want your kids to have. Why? And is it so we can brag and say, well, my kids are, they're excelling in the school of medicine, or my kids are doing that, or so they can serve the Lord? And we as parents have got to be careful with that. And as dads, it's on the sports courts, or sporting fields. And man, I want my kid to excel in this sport, and I want my kid to be the best they can be at this and that. My kids, Cade, my youngest, said yesterday, I just want to be good at one thing. And I'm like, time out, bro, and then he's like, but I got so much anxiety because I don't know what that one thing is, Dad. And I was like, time out. One of the greatest golfers, as far as I'm concerned, in our generation, Dustin Johnson, DJ, he had scholarships in 3 sports, really? and so he just, and you ask him, well, did you focus on golf your whole life? He's like, nah, whatever season it was, that's what I focused on.
Wow.
And he had 3 opportunities to go to 3 different realms, and he didn't say what, but most likely it was probably baseball, basketball, as big as he is, and golf. And he chose golf, and which has paid off for him, obviously. But obviously, as a dad, I could throw Cade in and he's got the gifts, he's got the build where we could run every day, and I could go online schooling, and we could just focus on running, and he's got potential. But why would I do that? Okay, so he could get a scholarship. Well, that's great, but what if the Lord calls him into ministry and a scholarship prevents him from that? We were looking at times last night, David, on the 100-meter, and my times as a high schooler in a Christian school would still have the state record in West Virginia.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And and I went to a small Christian school, and that's single A. I was still almost a half a second faster than anybody here in the state has ever been. Now, that could have got me. I told the kids, in the day of Facebook and Instagram and internet, that could have got me scholarships anywhere. But God had other plans. And if I would have done that and followed that scholarship and followed track, would I be where I am today? And so we just got to be careful as parents, forming our kids into something that maybe God's not forming them to be. And so, but it all comes back to this idea, David, of selfish ambition. And I think we need to look at our ambition and make sure that it is what God wants. We need to look at our ambition of what we desire for our children. Look at our ambition of what we desire in corporate. Look at our ambition of what we desire in our youth groups or in our churches. And make sure that wisdom is from above.
Right.
And make sure it's not coming from, all these business success authors and books, which I enjoy reading. Okay, but is it from God or is it earthly? Is it the earth standards? Is it what the world expects, or is it what God wants from me? So that would be my lesson this morning on selfish ambition. I love that word. I'm an ambitious person, I would say, but man, we've got to keep those things in check. Anything to add to that, David?
I was just thinking about how you brought up the idea of like different books and things. There's a lot of books that we read as Christians that has good like practical tips for being better, for pursuing excellence.
Yeah.
And I think if anybody's reading leadership or personal development books, that's probably their main goal.
Yeah.
But the thing we have to be careful of as Christians is the world can weave this idea right into that. So while the world is pursuing excellence as well, they're also pursuing selfish ambition. Yeah. And we have to be careful that, it's not earthly or sensual and that, and that it is from above and not from the world.
Absolutely. And I think we got to do our best to keep those things in check. Well, even like with Dave Ramsey, many of you might be Dave Ramsey people, and Dave Ramsey's philosophy is live like nobody else, so one day you can live like nobody else. But why? Okay, is that statement selfish ambition? And well, that's so I can give like no one else. Well, and I know that Dave Ramsey makes that emphasis, and I'm not saying he doesn't, but we've just got to be careful.
Yeah.
What our goals and our means are, even in our realms of finances. Well, hey, I hope that's an encouragement to you as we kind of were practical again.
Yeah.
Diving into that. So I promise you we're going to go from practical to getting where the rubber meets the road here in this idea of sensuality, this idea of earthly, and this idea of devilish. And we're going to dive in and see exactly what that means. Thank you again for diving deep with us and walking in faith, and we'll see you in a few days.